Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode, I am joined by author Enfys Book to discuss their first book, Queer Qabla. Among many other topics, Enfys explains the inherently queer nature of magic and Qabala, the importance of challenging traditional dualities, working with the Tree of Life for self-development, and the power of liminal spaces. Also, please be sure to subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, hit that like button and notification bell. Your support is truly appreciated. Enfys Book is a non-binary, bisexual clergy member within the Assembly of the Sacred Will and High Priest of the Fellowship of the Ancient White Stag Coven in Washington, D.C. As a bisexual, non-binary pagan, they employ a queer lens to break down limiting binaries in magical theory and practice, and advocate for bisexual, transgender, non-binary, genderqueer, queer, and asexual visibility and inclusion. Enfys is a founding member of the Misbehavin' Maidens, a band that describes their music as funny, filthy, feminist fandom folk. The band seeks to promote sex-positive and queer-inclusive feminism through music. Enfys is the author of Queer Qabla, their first book. Enfys, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Thanks, Nick. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm very happy that you're here, and happy Pride, by the way.
Yay! Pride Month.
Yeah. I was thinking that I should devote the entire month to the LGBTQ community on the podcast. I just didn't think about that. But I did want to say happy Pride, and I'm so excited to speak with you, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you. It actually came out today as we are talking right now. It is the official release day. So I'm very excited.
And today is June 8th, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, all right. Congratulations.
Book birthday. Yay.
Yeah. I thought that it was a very fun read. I think it's very accessible to people who may not be familiar with Qabala. And there were a few times where I chuckled while reading it in a very good way.
Good.
So, for example, at one point, and we'll get into this, this may not make a lot of sense to people at this point, but you referred to Bina and Hokmah as a lesbian power couple. And I thought that was just brilliant. So it was a very, very fun book. So I thought that the first place to begin, there's actually a couple places I want to begin. So I'm going to pack a lot into one long question here.
Okay. I'll try to keep up.
Yeah. Well, a couple of questions is I wanted to know your background with Qabala. You know, when did you first encounter it? When did you first start working with it? But also, I think maybe even before then, or whatever feels most natural to you, I thought that we should talk a little bit about what Qabala is for anyone who may not know.
For sure. And what I have for what is Qabala or Qabala, I pronounce it Qabala, and there are various different pronunciations out there, and we can talk about that more if you want. But I like to think of Qabala a few different ways. One that amuses me is that it is a framework for understanding life, the universe, and everything. Quoting Douglas Adams way out of context, with Qabala with its origins in Judaism. Another description I've heard is that it is spiritual architecture. That's Daniel Moeller from Shamanic Qabala. I also like to think of it as a way to understand how things become manifest and humanity's relationship with divinity. So most importantly, I think for a lot of magical practitioners who work with the Hermetic Qabala, as I do, it is the operating system upon which magic is built and works.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, we did speak a little bit before hitting record about the pronunciation of Qabala and Qabala and the spelling. So my understanding is there's actually 3 different ways of spelling it. There's
more than that even.
yeah, probably. That with the K, that refers to the Jewish mystical tradition. Mm-hmm. That the Q refers to the Hermetic magical tradition. Mm-hmm. And the C, I think, sometimes you'll see it spelled with a C, refers to Christian Qabala.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
And there's not 100% consistency in those spellings. I have
Right.
read books that were clearly about the hermetic side spelled with a K, and the other thing that varies is whether or not there is an H on the end.
Mm.
So I do without the H because I appreciate brevity. But some people spell it with an H, like Qabala for Wiccans, which just came out a few months ago from Jack Chanek, spells it with a Q and an H at the end. So you're going to see a lot of different spellings. One of the reasons for me it's really important to use that Q is because I want to make sure people understand I am not trying to reinvent something from a culture I am not from. There is definitely a strong history of Kabbalah within Judaism. That is where it originated. Based on what we know, in starting around the 1600s, there was a lot of really interesting collaborative work happening in Spain around various different types of spirituality and spiritual technology. And there was a lot of sharing between different groups. And so from there became this branch that existed outside of, but overlapping with, the Jewish traditional use of Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. And that's the version that we call Hermetic Kabbalah, which is spelled with a Q. And that is what my background is in, and what I can speak to. I cannot speak on behalf of people who are using it within a Judaic context.
Right, right. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that it actually goes back even further, probably to like the 1400s. It's all when Muslim control of Spain, when they were all working and living and teaching together and learning together, which would have been a phenomenal experience, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And looking back at some of the designs of what the Tree of Life looks like, that glyph in Robert Wang's Kabbalistic Tarot book, he has all these different versions of what that tree looked like. And sometimes it had leaves on it. Sometimes it was kind of like a wiggly snake. People tried a lot of different things before settling on the glyph that we use today for the Tree of Life.
Right, right. Can you say something about Hermetic Kabbalah, especially that Hermetic aspect, for anyone who may not be familiar with it? I'm putting you on the spot here.
I know, right? So my definition of Hermetic is something working within the context of ceremonial magic. Now, what is ceremonial magic? Ceremonial magic is when you basically apply the scientific method to magic. You try to find things that are replicable for anyone to do. You try them, you test them, you try variances, you do hypothesis, write it down, the whole shebang. And when you come across something that is repeatable, that's like, okay, this is a thing we know works. And that's what gets continued in the ceremonial magic context. Probably the most prominent ceremonial magic group was the Order of the Golden Dawn in Britain in the late 1800s and early 1900s, from which we have many famed occultists, Aleister Crowley, who branched off from that. We have Dion Fortune, who also branched out from that. A lot of them started there and went to found their own groups. But then also Israel Regardie, who was the main person within the Golden Dawn who was writing down and preserving and sharing all their information about Kabbalah. And he was raised Jewish, which I think is notable in that story.
Yeah. And I think we owe a huge debt of gratitude to Israel Regardie for releasing all of those notes, because otherwise it would have been secret. We wouldn't have that much. And, it's, I don't want to get too far off the path, but I know that one of the places that the Hermetic Kabbalah is manifested is in Tarot. And the deck that most people are familiar with, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, I think that the Kabbalistic aspects in it are so kind of obscure, intentionally obscured. And so that's why I think it's so wonderful that Israel Regardie did what he did, because it kind of opened it up.
Yeah.
and that's what Crowley did as well. He just threw open all the doors and said,
everybody enjoy this stuff. But then he would also conceal things within his text by, doing sort of intentional lying in certain places when you're supposed to pay attention. But I really was fascinated and drawn into Kabbalah about 10 years ago was when I started really digging into it. And at first it was sort of because, well, the tradition I'm part of, the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, a lot of the foundation of our magical work is based in Qabala. That is part of our almost 40-year-old tradition at this point. So a lot of what we do is Qabala based, and I wanted to understand how it worked. So I started reading, and we always recommend people read up on Qabala because it's important to understand how the things we do work. But not a lot of people really relish it. Like, they're just like, all right, I will read this. It is complicated. It is dense. It is not fun. It is hard and confusing. And I also had that experience, but I found the complications more interesting than off-putting. What I found off-putting were a lot of the early texts written in, the 1930s through the 50s or so have a lot of problems, things that as a queer person living today, I did not find very friendly. So there's some blatant homophobia in there, for starters. You've got some really pretty horrible racism and xenophobia, not to mention ableism and a lot of things that really require you to take a deep breath and try to separate the wheat from the chaff, because there's a lot of great stuff in those books. You just have to get around some of this other stuff. And my method is, I write a few swear words in the margins. Don't worry, they're not library books. They're mine. I can write in them if I want to. So I write a few swear words in the margins, and then I go on. And I just thought it would be so nice to read a book on Qabala that wasn't super dense, that didn't lead with, here's how complicated it is, now let's try to understand it, but something that started with, you can get a simple grasp on this without having to have a PhD. You can go and learn and enjoy, and there's a lot here that you can experience rather than just trying to ingest an entire library's worth of information in short order. So that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. It's a book I wish I had when I was starting to learn about Qabala.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I found it very accessible, and I think that others will find it accessible as well. I think the closest parallel that I would make in books that I've read would be Chicken Qabala by Lon Milo Duquette, which I think he also tried to make it very accessible to people.
He really did. He wrote a very funny book. The piece that I find just a little uncomfortable about that book is that he speaks from the point of view as a rabbi, and he is not Jewish.
Yeah, that's right.
And that gets into a cultural appropriation conversation. But I do appreciate how funny it is and how he made it very accessible for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is the Assembly of the Sacred Will, is that a Wiccan group?
Yeah, so we are Wiccan. It's sort of a fusion of Wicca and ceremonial magic, at the end of the day. We're a syncretic Wiccan tradition. We are 14 covens strong at this point, and been going for about 40 years, like I said. And we're based in the mid-Atlantic. It's all geographically contiguous at this point. We're all based in either Maryland, I think. Do we have anyone in Virginia? Not yet. We have covens in Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York at this point. And Delaware.
All right. Yeah, I have some familiarity with Wicca, and I've got some Wiccan books here surrounding me. But I think that most of the ones that I'm familiar with in the Wiccan covens that I have visited, they, as far as I know, never included Qabala. So I found it really interesting that you were incorporating that ceremonial hermetic aspect to Wicca. I really appreciated what you were doing with the genders, because it is problematic. I remember reading some Wiccan books about ceremonies, and it's all masculine, feminine, man, woman. And, it even gets into, like heterosexual intercourse sometimes. And I remember reading this, I'm like, no, I don't want to, and I felt left out. And so I think that it was what you're doing here is really helpful to include people into the tradition.
Yeah, it's interesting. My journey with Qabala has run in close parallel with my journey of my understanding my own gender. So I came out as non-binary a few years ago, and I use they, them pronouns. And part of the reason for that is the work that I was doing, you went to masculine, feminine energy. And I'm not a person who believes there is a continuum. One end is masculine, one end is feminine, and non-binary people are smack in the middle. It's really like there's a different axis entirely in that equation. And we just, we're up there. But trying to discern whether those two energies made sense and were things I could identify within myself, I started to see all the overlap between them and started to deconstruct and be like, these aren't actually opposites.
Right.
These are different states, but not necessarily opposite. And then I started to get really frustrated because there is a tendency in Wiccan traditions to gender everything, including things that do not by any means require gender, like, for example, magical tools or elements, things like that. You don't have to gender them. There are things that transcend gender, and it's okay. So that was another reason that writing this book was important to me, is that I felt a lot of the Qabala writers were overlooking some very queer inclusive things that were inherent to the Tree of Life and sort of pushing them to the side or being like, oh, not really. Like, I'm pretty sure it was the Zohar I was reading a translation of. And there's a line about, unless a person has both masculine and feminine within them, they cannot see God, or something to that effect. And the translator's note was, this is why it's important to get married.
Oh,
and I was like, is it though? Is that the message? So, and there are many times where like Israel Regardie kind of does that too, where it's like, well, just a big sort of, no, it's not gay. And it's like, no, it kind of is. And that's okay. It's really inclusive for everyone. So I started pulling at the thread when I realized a few things where I was like, wait a minute, this is not a binary gender symbol at all. And sort of pulling apart. And it just kept going. Like, the more I dug, the more I found. And I will say, I am not the first person to think about Qabala in a queer context, but I could not find anything online about it. So there are other people who've been teaching it, but that work has not been published in a way that I could find. So I think independently, several different people, including myself, kind of came to this conclusion.
Yeah. So let me ask this, and this is, I think maybe it's a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just to be clear. What do you mean by Queer Qabla?
So I named the book, well, I don't get the final say in the name of the book or its title. Right. The publisher gets to decide that, but I'm glad they chose my suggestion of Queer Qabla. Because my initial inclination was something like, well, we're queering the Qabala, because there's this academic discipline of queer theory where you look at things through a queer lens. You say, okay, what's being assumed as the norm here and why? And is that actually true or not? And where does it come from? So I was thinking, it's really taking a queer perspective on Qabala, but the more I found, the more I'm like, no, it just already is queer. I don't have to put any rainbow glitter on this. I just have to point at things that already exist within the tree that have been there for much longer than I've been alive. So that's the part I found really exciting in this work, was that I'm not just saying, well, this is kind of like this thing, or you could look at it from this way. I'm just saying, no, other people have been saying this for decades, that this is part of the Tree of Life, and that's pretty gay, that's pretty queer. There's a lot of things that I found myself in my magic and was able to better understand myself through it.
Wonderful. And didn't you also say or suggest in the book that magic itself is queer?
Yes. Magic is queer. It is anti-capitalist. It is radical, because magic breaks down power structures. The concept of gender is deeply rooted in power structures, of being able to point to the other, this is not that. And ultimately that tends to lead to, and this is better than that. So magic levels the playing field, because magic says everybody has power. Everybody is divine. You don't necessarily need an intermediary between you and the gods. You can talk to them directly. You can interact with the magics of this planet and the universe. And I think that's pretty awesome. We come into pagan and magical traditions as people who've been marginalized and had our power taken away, only to have some people say, well, now you've got to do it just like they do in society, and you've got to fit into masculine or feminine, and you've got to be able to, put the blade into the cup, and then that, makes magic like IKEA furniture. You insert tab A into slot B, and feeling like, wait a minute, I came here to feel good about being weird and to be with other weirdos, but we're just going to use the same stuff the rest of the culture does. That's not okay.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. And I think that goes back, even the entire idea of like a witch. I always think in terms of, I think it was the Simone de Beauvoir, the French feminist existentialist philosopher, who defined woman as the deviant other. And
The Second Sex, I believe, is the title of her book.
Yeah. And I always kind of think about that in terms of not just the female, but others as well, that there's always this, like you said, existing in the margins. And that was, for me, when I was very young and toying a little bit with Wicca, that was one of the appeals to it, was that it was, I felt, like, well, I'm an outsider, and, maybe this is an outsider tradition. And then you get in and it was all masculine, feminine, like you said, chalice and blade.
Yep. You got to arrange the circle, boy, girl, the magic doesn't work, that kind of thing. And I don't want to throw too much shade on other people's tradition and what works for them. I just think that if you're hoping to draw people who are on the margins of society, you might want to take a closer look at some of those assumptions about how magic works and see if that's really true.
Yeah. Well, I think that it evolves, all traditions evolve over time. And I think that it was a product of the time that it was created. It doesn't have to stay that way.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of what we consider to be ancient knowledge was really just sort of cobbled together in the 50s and of the 1950s. And, it really isn't that ancient. There's a lot of guesses. There's a lot of stuff we can trace, but oral tradition is a long game of telephone.
Right. For sure. Yeah. We're always in this, I think, process of recreating something that we don't really know, and trying to, I guess, make it what we want it to be. But there's creativity in that.
Oh, for sure. Well, and there's power in having something repeat and be the same over and over and over. You're creating a container for that thing.
Right.
But, just because it's old doesn't mean it's best. Just because it's ancient doesn't mean it's authentic to be used today. Not trying to do magic from 500 years ago in a modern context may not actually work very well, because we don't have the same relationship with our world that people did back then. And there are ways we can update and make stuff really interesting without like having to bring iPads into ritual circle. There's ways you can modernize that don't actually involve technology.
Let's talk a little bit about magic and Qabala and how those work together.
Well, you mentioned tarot earlier, and I like to think of tarot is being built on the operating system of Qabala, as you mentioned before. So just one aspect that is ingrained with Qabala. There are 10 spheres. There are 10 cards for each of the suits. There are 22 major arcana cards. There are 22 paths that connect the spheres on the tree of life. So there's a lot of synchronicity there. There's also 4 worlds, and we have 4 court cards. So the parallels are really pretty remarkable. And I think the vast majority of modern tarot decks are also built on that model that is very Kabbalistic. It also has really close ties with astrology. The astrology connections are a little messier. I include them in the book. I included 2 correspondence charts in the book, just 2, the one with tarot and the one with astrology, because those are the most frequently used ones and the most widely applicable for magical work for a lot of people. So yeah, astrology gets interesting because we keep discovering new planets, and it's a lot fuzzier a number of things that sort of map to the tree and how they map, and disagreement over what gets mapped where. But yeah, I mean, to me, one of the aspects of Qabala and how it relates to magic is that it teaches us how things become manifest, or at least it gives us a diagram for a possibility of how things become manifest. You go from this thing that's like the inhale before the exhale, pure potential with nothing actually happening yet. And then boom, it becomes wild rushing energy, but energy rushing in all directions doesn't actually do anything. So then you have to give it the idea of a container to put that in. And once you mix energy and form, put tab A into slot B, you get the potential for manifestation. And for Qabala, you get the potential for manifestation and magic.
Okay. So, but I'm still a little confused. I mean, yeah, I understand that, but is it giving you a blueprint for manifestation? Is that how you work with it with magical, or is there some other way?
There's a lot of different ways you can work with it in magic. So there is that pathway to manifestation called the lightning flash. That is, if you play connect the dots with the Sephiroth or spheres 1 through 10, you get this particular pattern, and you are following a particular flow of things and a dynamic tension between force and form. So it goes through a lot of different iterations before things are actually here and existing here. So it gives you an idea of, if I want to take a thing that doesn't exist yet and make it exist, what kind of process does it have to go through? So that's one of them. The other thing that's really useful, and I think why a lot of people lean hard on those correspondence tables in books, which if I'd included many more of those, it would have been a much longer book. But, I've like, other books have done this better. Go there. It's okay. But with those correspondence tables, it is another tool in your toolkit for creating resonance among the types of things related to the magic you're trying to do. For example, if you are trying to bring some expansive energy to what you are working on, you want to open up new possibilities for things. Well, for those who work with astrology, you might say Jupiter is a really good thing to work with. All right, so we've got Jupiter. And then if you work with tarot, you might also be looking at the 4s from each suit, because there's a certain expansive quality there. And then if you bring in Qabala, the 4th Sephiroth is Hesed, and that is all about expansion and possibility and vision. So you start to layer these symbols on top of each other, and you're basically creating a calling card for the universe to say, hey, this is what I want to happen here. I'm using every symbol in my symbol set to drive energy in this specific way. So it's one more thing you can add to the toolkit.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because that was something I was thinking about earlier in terms of the Sephiroth and the energies of them. And I know that in many magical traditions, there's also working with various gods and those energies. And I've done this. I have an altar in my bedroom with Jupiter on it and trying to tap into those Jupiterian energies. And for me, it's not, that it's the idea that there is this Jupiter, Zeus that I'm trying to tap into. But there's that archetypal energy. And it seems like that's exactly what you're doing with the Sephiroth.
Right. Yeah. There's deity correspondences too. I mean, there are correspondences for herbs, for perfumes, for incenses. Like I could go on and on, minerals and animals and everything like that. It's basically a giant universal card catalog that we sort things into. And I know that metaphor dates me quite a bit. Apologies to folks younger than me who maybe haven't used one, but yeah, I mean, it's a way you can sort and retrieve information that has been filed there over time by building a relationship with those Sephiroth. And I meant to mention before too, the other correspondence you could add to that working for Jupiter is the color blue, because that is the Briatic color of Hesed that you could add as an additional symbol in your working. And a lot of what I have in the book are layerings of those different types of symbols that are trying to resonate with the exact same type of energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I specifically wore a gray shirt today to try to tap into the Hokmah wisdom energies.
Excellent. I guess I'm wearing, with white and black, I'm doing Keter and Bina over here. Yeah. So between the two of us, we've got the supernal triad.
Yeah, right on. I did give it thought though. I was thinking like, what color shirt am I going to wear for this?
I just didn't want to wear anything with swear words on it. So, this is what I have.
Yeah, that's very good. So you can use the tree of life. And I think that what I'll do, I think most people are familiar with the tree of life, but in the show notes, I'll try to put a JPEG in there of the tree of life so that people can refer to it and look at it if they're a little bit lost. But you can use it for magic, but can you also use it for like self-development?
Oh, absolutely. That is one of the hallmarks, I think, of Hermetic Kabbalah, is that we see the tree of life, like within the Judaic tradition, it's the 10 divine emanations of God. The way we approach it and I'm not saying that's wrong, that's just, it's a different approach to the same tool. Within the Hermetic tradition, these are different levels of consciousness. These are different levels by which you can connect yourself back to the source. Like, we're already divine, like we don't need to become diviner necessarily, but being able to access the part of yourself that is eternal, your higher self, and figuring out what kinds of things do I need to work on to get to that point. Qabala is a roadmap. And that is one of the most exciting things that got me into it early on. Was I felt like, am I making progress at all? I'm doing all this stuff. I know personal development's really important. I'm doing my shadow work and all these other wonderful buzzwords we have within the vegan community. But it's like, oh, this kind of shows me where I'm going. And part of what excited me about that and got me thinking along that line too, is Alan Moore's Promethea series of graphic novels, where literally the Qabala is a roadmap that the characters travel and they go along the paths. And it's really, if you learn better through allegory, that is probably what I would recommend as something to read on that type of thing.
It's on my list. I need to read that. I'm very aware of it, but I've not read it yet. But I
parts of it do not age well. I will put that out there. There are some things that are a little like, really? And to me, the story isn't as good as the metaphors within it. The way tarot is described, the way the magical tools are described, that is all fantastic. And it was written as basically, here's a primer on ceremonial magic. You know, here you're going to learn Qabala, tarot, the elements, and the tools. Boom, there you go. And we're going to put a story around it and talk about the imagination and manifestation and how all that relates. But mostly it's a really good grounding tool in those kind of disciplines.
Okay. So this, using the tree of life for self-development, is that what is meant by path working?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So I use path working in a more general sense to mean you are journeying on a path. I'm sorry, my cat has decided to nibble on my arm here suddenly, and you can't see there. You can just barely see him. This is Atticus. He's just decided it is attention time. So path working for me is you are following a guided meditation. You are walking a path someone is describing to you within your mind. So, but yes, there are paths within the tree of life, and walking along those paths, like using Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki's book, The Shining Paths, which I highly recommend. That is definitely a way you can do some inner work and to work your way up the tree.
Okay. And you provide a lot of, I think, path working exercises in the book, the meditations.
Yeah, I think it's important that, and my tendency, probably one of my flaws with my approach to magic, is I love to read so much, and I just want to read everything. And when they have exercises, I tend to go, that's nice, and kind of continue reading. But in truth, we learn the best when we experience a thing. And I want to make sure people have the tools to experience that. And it's one thing to teach, it's another thing to show. And so I think it's important in any kind of magical book that it's not just, here is the history of blah, but how do I use that? How can I relate to that? How can I connect to it is really important. Yeah.
Well, I liked the practices that you created because there's a consistency to all of them. You know, they all begin the same way and kind of end the same way, but there are different variations that are unique to each of the Sephiroth. So I thought that was really helpful.
Thank you. Yeah. Part of what kicked off the Queer Qabla work is that in 2017, as part of my second degree work within my tradition, you have to create something that can be used by the whole tradition and benefit the whole tradition. And what I did was a series of, I basically wrote all the classes and rituals and path workings my coven would use for a year. So I wrote 8 classes covering the 10 Sephiroth. I paired Geburah and Hesed and Netzach and Hod together for the same holiday, because it's really helpful to approach those as pairs, honestly. So it worked out well. But yeah, so I wrote these path workings, and they were heavily based on Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki's Shining Paths. But what I wanted to do when I started blogging about Queer Qabla was say, okay, how would I make this different? Like, how can I do this in a way that's a bit more approachable but will still work magically? And so the way I envision the temples of each of the spheres is probably not exactly like people would see elsewhere, but it was important to me that these environments be something that you would be comfortable exploring in, and environments that are not full of, binary gender symbols and things like that, or, oh, now you're meeting your feminine side or something. Like,
Right.
I wanted it to be a little more open-ended, what a person is going to experience and what they're going to learn there, because that's ultimately their own. I can't tell them what they're going to learn or get out of it. That's really on them. So I had a lot of fun creating those, and I really wanted to tie them all to kind of the same starting point, because it's important to start with Malkuth and work up,
Right,
so you
right.
have some grounding. If you jump straight to Keter, you're going to be lost. So make sure we start with our roots and grow up, so that it is easier to come back to this plane and not get too lost in the clouds.
Right.
Because we
Yeah.
all need to like drive and do things, and like do
Yeah,
things where
for
we need
sure.
our feet on the ground.
Right, for sure. And I also, this is completely off the topic, but it's here in my notes. I'm going to mention it right now. I just wanted to say thank you for mentioning the TV series Angel in the book.
Yeah. That phrase has stayed with me forever. So
Yeah.
the phrase in the book is from one of the many apocalypse episodes of Angel, which
Yeah.
I loved Buffy and Angel back
Oh,
in the
yeah.
day,
Yeah.
and still really enjoy them. But there's this line about, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. And that paradox just really struck me. I had it as a quote on one of my social profiles for a while. And yeah, that's kind of the ultimate lesson of the tree of life to me, is that at the end of the day, we're all one. We're all from the same source. We are all drops in the same ocean. And to an extent, this life, we have to keep it in perspective. But at the same time, if there is no meaning, then it's our job to give it meaning. It's our job to make this journey in this incarnation the best it can be for ourselves, but also the best it can be for others. And it's been so rewarding to hear people who got early copies of the book, and my friends who just got their pre-orders over the weekend say, this is really shifting my perspective on some things. And I really appreciate that. So, that's part of my work as a person, is I want to be a guide where I can, where I've found stuff that might help people. And that's great.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all called to that kind of work right now. I always think that this is a kind of all hands on deck moment.
Yep. This
Um,
world doesn't get any easier to live in, does it?
No, it doesn't. And that's why I think that the angel quote is so appropriate. And, I love Buffy. And
Yeah, I managed to work in references to not only Angel, but also The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, which is my favorite comic of all time, written by Ryan North, and also Mystery Science Theater 3000, which was my favorite show for many, many years growing up, and helped me understand, hey, maybe conformity isn't the goal of all life. So yeah, I got to work a little bit of my nerdery in there. Originally, I wanted to put more song like lyrics in there, but that's really hard to get the rights for, so I had to cut all that out. And I had to cut out all the swear words I put in originally, because that's I find them amusing, but I understand it's for a broader audience, so we don't want people to drop the book because they see something they don't like.
Right. Well, I always liked, I'll move along from this, but one of the things I liked about Angel is that it did bring up all these questions of identity throughout it. So I thought that was appropriate for the book that you were doing, although that's not what you're talking about, but I think it's always there.
Yeah, that question of destiny is really interesting. Like, what is how we're created, what we're destined to be? What is our path? How much say do we get in our own path? Is it all predetermined or not? There are some big philosophical questions tackled by that show.
Yeah. And again, like identity, I always think of the character Fred and Illyria. And
I will never stop my heart breaking from that whole storyline. No spoilers for people who haven't seen it, but
I know. But it's like, what makes a person, what makes you, and I think the same thing with Angel and the idea that you lose your soul when you become a vampire. Who are you? What remains? So these are really important questions of identity. And I think queerness fits into it, very much so,
Yeah,
so.
now that you mention it, yeah, that has been a recurring theme for me because I wrote my college senior thesis on the movie Dark City,
Oh yeah.
which really has strong undertones of philosophy about like what is the human soul, what makes a person that person, can we just mix and match people's memories and change the way they behave, or is there something more fundamental than that? So I had to defend it as a thesis to 3 different department representatives because that was a requirement if you wanted to graduate summa cum laude. So I had to come at it from the perspectives of philosophy, theology, and literature all at once. And yeah, it was really fun. I got the summa cum laude, I passed, but I still have that paper and I still go back to it. I'm like, yeah, that movie, it still resonates a lot. There's some really big questions in there.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the graduation there.
Oh, well, I'm very pleased. Obviously, it has helped my career amazingly. Like no one cares how you did in college once you're out in the working world, but I did learn a lot about writing, so that's a good thing.
Yeah. And you write very well.
Thank you.
Very well. So we've been talking about how gender is represented in magic and Qabala and whatnot. And there's this, dualism often, which is, my understanding is dualism almost always incorporates a value judgment. And that's what we want to get away from. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the language that you lean towards is polarities.
Yeah, actually, I don't polarity is how it's been described in many places, kind of in the same way of dualism. What I'm trying to struggle with what would be a better word. Ivo Dominguez Jr. says valence might be better. He has this great essay on polarity in Queer Magic anthology and talks about polarity isn't just 2 opposing points. That's not the only way you can make magic. There are a lot of different powers to be tapped into. There's the power of resonance of like things. There is the power of things that maybe are slightly different but work well together, like different notes in a chord in music. There is things that cycle around each other. There's, magical power there. So there's a lot of different ways different energies can interact. And if you limit yourself to just, well, it's just masculine and feminine energy, and then that's it. That's kind of like magical training wheels in a way. Yes, it works. And we probably all instantly know what it means when we say masculine and feminine because we were raised in a patriarchal society. So naturally, man active, woman passive, like absolutely, we're like, yeah, sure, no notes, we've got that. But there's so much more. And also a lot of ways we're already using things outside the gender binary to create magic in various traditions. So things like, the pentacle, that's not a binary energy symbol right there. You've got a lot of different points crisscrossing. We also have the tree of life in Qabala. That is not binary. In fact, one of the first things that struck me is, oh, they say there's a masculine and a feminine pillar, but then there's this one in between. And that's the pillar of balance, or, I like to call it the non-binary pillar myself. But it's not just a blend between the two. It's like a transmutation of the energies from both sides to create something completely new. And that really resonated with me. And I think there's so much potential for folks to work with their magic on a deeper level by taking a queer lens to concepts like polarity or binaries or dualisms.
Yeah. And I really like the middle path aspect too, because the first thing that comes to my mind is that it's that middle path that gets you from Malkuth, which is this world, straight up to Kether, which is, where divinity kind of is,
Yep.
So it is that path to the divine.
Exactly. Right? But at the same time, you can't ignore the pillars on either side. And one of the metaphors I use in the book is, I love rock climbing. I find it to be a fantastic way to stay fit. And when you're climbing, you're going up, but you also have to be conscious of your points of balance. And sometimes the points of balance to get you to that next rock you're trying to reach for look very unbalanced from the ground. Like if someone's looking at you, you're standing on your right tiptoe, your left foot is being used as kind of a kickstand, and then you're reaching your right arm up way high while twisting. But that is how you ascend. So much in the same way with Qabala, if you just go straight up the middle pillar, you're kind of missing a lot of the journey, because you've got to understand and be able to hold in tension the forces from the pillars on your left and on your right. The pillars of force and form, or masculine and feminine, mercy or severity, whichever binary thing you want to call them. They're very important to the journey, and they can't be left behind. But it is interesting to note that what we would argue as, if we were to rank the Sephiroth on importance, I'd say the most important ones are the ones in that middle pillar. You've got Keter, the ultimate unity, and Malkuth, the ultimate manifestation. And then the point of perfect balance between them in Tifereth, and the place where we encounter imagination in Yesod.
Yeah, wonderful. So with the, I like the metaphor that you gave of the rock climbing, that you have to have both, you have to move about to get to the top, but you also talk about liminality a little bit. And I was wondering if you could maybe discuss that a little bit in terms of its relationship to the problems that we're having with the language of dualism and polarities, and how it can help us.
So yeah, liminality is another thing we work with a lot in magic, and maybe without realizing that that is one of the queerest concepts we can work with. Liminality is about that which is and is not, the betwixt and between, the places that are neither here nor there. And that is how I've kind of come to understand my gender as sort of a liminal space. It doesn't exist on the map. It's not here, it's not there, it just is. My short snarky answer is, gender is exhausting. I just want to be a cloud. Like being corporeal is kind of a pain sometimes, literally. But when we talk about liminality, I think it's very useful, especially for folks who are maybe allies trying to understand queer folks better, is to work with those ideas of liminality, like crossroads. That's a theme that comes up a lot in magic, the places that aren't here or there. Doing things on, the full moon or the new moon. Those are points of transition in the moon's cycle. Those are liminal periods. We talk about Beltane and Samhain as being when the veil is thinnest, and in those it's a liminal time. So there's power in the liminal things that we can explore, like labyrinths. I love labyrinths, like walking them, doing finger labyrinths, I find is just super helpful, not only magically, but also for mental health. Just that sort of intentional, mindful walk to nowhere and then back again is really great. So I would encourage people, especially if they're allies trying to wrap their heads around, like, why is this so important? What is so different about being queer? How can I experience something like that? Think about the times in your life that are liminal. Like if you're with someone who is on the verge of death, what does that feel like? If you are in between jobs and just trying to find your way, and you have no script for how to get that next thing, you're just trying different stuff, that's a liminal time. And there's a lot of very familiar things for queer folks of that experience. We don't fit the standard script. We have to make it up as we go.
Yeah, and you use coming out as a metaphor throughout this journey on the Tree of Life, which I also found really helpful, because it's something that all queer people have to do and constantly have to do.
It's not a one and done, unfortunately. No. Yeah, and I would say not everyone has to do, not everyone chooses to do.
Right.
Everyone has
true.
different, like some people is simply not safe to do so.
Right.
And I respect that. Everyone should come out in their own time if they want to.
Right.
But coming out to yourself is something that I think usually does happen at some point. We come to understand ourselves as, oh, that's what I am. Things make more sense now. Okay, now I can proceed based on this. So yeah, it's coming out is really powerful. And I liken it to the experience of Tiferet, which is the point of perfect balance on the tree. It is the sixth sphere. It's right in the middle of both. It's in the middle pillar and between the top and the bottom of the tree. And what is that experience, that click? Like, oh, this fits. Like, that's the experience of Tiferet. So when you realize, oh, I'm non-binary, or for me earlier in my life, it was also, oh, I'm bisexual. I'm not confused. I'm just this. It's a really powerful moment, and one I don't think we celebrate as much as when you come out to others, which, like you said, you have to do over and over and over again, not just reminding people who conveniently forget, but every new situation you have to evaluate. Is it safe to come out here? Should I come out here? Yeah, it's interesting. I've been house hunting lately, and there are neighborhoods where I'm like, would I feel safe here as a person with pink hair and rainbow glasses who probably is going to have a pride flag in front of their house, And quite honestly, there's some places where I'm like, no, I would not. I would not feel safe in this neighborhood, even though it's a great house. I'm not sure this is the one for me.
I feel very fortunate that I live in a very safe neighborhood. I have a lesbian couple across the street. There's a lesbian couple down the street.
Awesome.
There's a gay couple who've adopted kids, and we have that, and we have families. So it's a nice blend, and I love to see people coming together. And that's one of the things I was thinking here in terms of Tiferet, because I know that things can be, these Sephiro, I think you called them like card catalogs in the book. You also refer to them as like a filing cabinet.
Filing cabinet. Yeah, I borrowed that from Israel Regardie. It's a filing cabinet of the universe.
Yeah, but I've seen it also as self, which is perfect for what you were just talking about, but also beauty. And I think I could be wrong on this one, but also compassion.
Yeah.
Compassion
for yourself and compassion for others. Every time you learn something new about yourself, in some ways it may make your life harder, but also makes your mental processes a bit easier. When you're like, oh, this, it's one of, I think, the blessings of this current era amid all of the discord that we have, is that we're starting to be a lot more forthright about issues of mental health and giving people language to explain the things going on in their own brains and hearts and lives and bodies, so that it's not just, well, I don't know, I just thought everyone hated this. And that's me. I have what I call the itchy sweater metaphor. I post about this on my blog. It's a way I explain to straight cisgender people why I didn't realize I was non-binary when I was 10, for example. And it's like, if you can imagine that when you're born, you are given a sweater by your parents that you wear all day, every day. It will grow with you. It'll change size as it needs to, but that is your sweater. That's what you always have to wear. And let's say you were given a really itchy sweater. Now, if you'd never known any other sweater or what it felt like, there's a point at which you're just going to back burner the itch. Like, you're aware of it, but you can't focus on it or you won't get anything done. So it's just this background static. And you just sort of assume everyone has that because that's just your experience of sweater. And then one day you may notice, hey, that person's sweater looks a lot more comfortable than mine. I wonder what that's like. And maybe if you're lucky, you get to briefly try on a different sweater and see how it feels. And that sweater feels amazing. It's soft, it smells nice, it's just good against your skin. You're like, oh, is this what everyone else's sweater feels like? Wait a minute, what have I been doing wrong? But then you're only getting to try it on for a second. So you got to put that itchy sweater back on. And oh, now you notice how itchy it is. Oh, now it's all you can think of. You're like, oh, now I've seen what possibility there is, and why have I always assumed I just have to live with this itchy sweater forever? But then, so maybe you decide to go full time with that nicer sweater, but there are people who will say, but that itchy sweater is you. That's who, we gave you that sweater. We are your parents. How dare you take that? How dare you say it's itchy? It's the one that's for you. We picked it out just for you. And anytime someone misgenders you, calls you the wrong pronouns, whatever, it's like they're putting that itchy sweater back on just for a moment. And that's why it sucks. And that's a metaphor I've found some people can get their heads around. Like, oh, so I'm like, yeah, I didn't even see the other sweater to try on until I was in my late 30s.
Right.
And then I was like, oh, well, let me see what they, them pronouns feel like. Oh, wow, that's what they feel like. Heck, why have I been doing this to myself my whole
Yeah.
life, you know? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Good metaphor. It's really interesting. I know we're kind of getting off the topic, but I find it really interesting how the culture is changing and it's opening up and
Mhm.
being more accepting. And it just feels like there are these, talking about your liminal spaces, that the
Mm,
borders are being pressed upon, not just in terms of gender, but in so many other
mhm.
ways, and I find it endlessly fascinating. And I can't always say that I understand, but it doesn't matter. All that
Yeah,
is required of me is just to treat every human being with the respect that they deserve. you
exactly.
know I think that's the only way to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, and appreciate that there are really itchy sweaters. Um,
Yeah. Well, and if people really like that, it's on my blog, and I have a downloadable mini zine of that you can
mm,
print and fold. It's just one piece of
right.
paper back and front. If people want to like have those as a resource at an
Okay.
event, I just open source that, just take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. I'll get your webpage from you. I'll ask you here in a minute, where people can go to find more information. But my best friend, her daughter recently came out as non-binary and goes by Link now. I've not had the opportunity to speak with them yet, but will when I visit Denver here pretty soon. So I'm looking forward to the conversation
That's exciting.
because I'm learning so much from people. And I hope everyone opens their minds and embraces these liminal stages. Um,
Absolutely. Not
yeah.
everything has to be this or that. That's an age of Pisces
Oh,
thing, like
yeah.
sorting everything into column A or column B. We're in the age of Aquarius now. We can be more gray area. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. All the fun stuff. It's all the wisdom's in the gray.
Yeah, there you go. Again, we're the
um,
supernal triad here. We got
yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the one question that I was going to ask, and this will be one of the last questions I ask you, because I know we're running out of time, but my brain froze. But it was with I guess the Sephiroth, but also how the tree of life is broken down into the four worlds. There's a fractal nature to it
Mm,
all.
yeah.
And what came to mind when you were talking was that fractal nature, and how, because there's this fractal nature to it, that the tree of life is inherently kind of inclusive.
Yeah, exactly. So, for those who don't know what a fractal is, I will define it.
Yeah.
A fractal is a geometric pattern that no matter how close you zoom in or how far you pull out, it's the same. Like you will see the same pattern repeated and repeated into infinity, either direction. And that's what Kabbalah is, because the entire tree of life, that whole process of manifestation, all those different sephiroth, every path is contained within each smaller element of it. So the sphere of Malkuth has its own full tree of life. Every single sphere has their own tree of life within it. So kind of like if you look at the yin yang thing, where there is a black dot in the middle of the white side and a white dot in the middle of the black side, everything contains all that came before it, everything that comes after it. It's just turtles all the way down. So no matter where you are on the tree, there is queer representation to be had. I talk about, one of the chapters is about Hod, and I call it, analytical ace and intersex. And ace is like short for asexuality or aromanticism. So, even though that's the sphere I feel like asexual people will really find a kinship with, because it celebrates platonic relationships, but that sphere is also in every other sphere on the tree. So it's not like, well, I just belong here. It's like, no, you get the whole tree, man. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
all for you. It's all for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and that, I think that did come through in your book. I loved how inclusive the tree of life became, and so I think it's really important, and I think that people will get quite a bit out of it, and I think they'll enjoy it.
I
I
hope
think they'll
so.
enjoy it very much. So the last two questions, these are the questions I always ask, the boring questions. What's next for you? What do you have coming up?
So Well, in July, I am a virtual speaker at the Goddess Conference in Glastonbury
Oh,
in England, which is very exciting. I have pre-recorded a 20-minute workshop about
okay.
how me as a non-binary person found the queer divine in Kabbalah. So it's a
Hmm,
little bit of my life story. And
hmm.
I believe that will also be posted on their website after the fact if people want to see that video. So that's in the immediate future. I'm also doing book signings around, starting just with the East Coast. I kind of wanted to get out to the West Coast right now,
Hmm.
but I'm not super comfortable getting on planes unless I
Right.
absolutely have to at the moment. So I'll probably do that a bit later because I have some friends I really want to see out there. And it's really fun
Right.
to go and meet people who enjoyed the book.
Hmm.
So I will also be presenting next year at Convocation in Detroit and also at the Sacred Space Conference in Baltimore. And of
Okay.
course, I'm working on the next big thing, but I
Yeah.
can't really talk about it yet.
Yeah, that's okay. That's understood.
Mm.
Where can people go to find out more about you and your work and maybe the itchy sweater article?
Sure. I think if you want to go directly to the itchy sweater one, it's majorarqueerna.com/itchy, I think is the short way to get there. But don't worry, if you just go to majorarqueerna.com, it is one of the pictures on the homepage. You will see a picture of a person wearing an itchy sweater. It will take you there if I remembered it wrong. I also have a guide for parents of adult children who have just come out as non-binary or trans, because when I was looking for that information for my parents, it was really hard to find. And I was like, wow, Googling this is really hard because it's all for teenagers. But it's like, no, I'm in my 40s and I'm trying to
Yeah.
explain this. So I do have a collection of resources and ideas specifically for parents of non-binary people as well. That's a very popular post. But majorarqueerna.com and at majorarqueerna on most social networks. I'm not on TikTok. I leave that
Mm.
to the younger generation. I'm sorry. That I try to give people the spaces they have claimed.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And please feel free to, drop me a line if you liked the book. And if you liked the book, I'd also appreciate if people would leave a review on Amazon and or Goodreads, because number of reviews really matters for how the algorithm treats your book. And I want people to see that it exists.
Okay. Well, I'll put links for all of that in the show notes and the video description. And
Awesome.
I'll put Amazon, the link to Amazon. I usually put links to bookshop.org
I
because
do as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll still put
Actually,
that in there, but
okay.
we'll
So
put
I can
Amazon too, just so you can get those reviews.
thank you. After we're done recording, by the way, I can give you 2 master links if you don't want to list 18. I've got like the
Okay.
LinkedIn bio link that has
Okay.
everything and like the links of where to buy it, including Bookshop and Amazon and
Okay.
everything. So
Okay. All right. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure. All right. Well, Enfys, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I truly enjoyed this conversation. It was absolutely delightful.
Oh, me too. Thanks, Nick. It's really great to meet you.
Okay, you too. And that's a wrap on episode 44 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you are part of my YouTube audience. This is going to be the last episode of Rebel Spirit Radio for the first season. I will be back. This episode will release on June 17th, and more episodes, the second season, will begin in July. I will also be posting some videos to the YouTube channel during that time, so never fear. This is not the end of Rebel Spirit Radio. I really enjoyed creating these first 44 episodes, and I'm very much looking forward to moving forward with Rebel Spirit Radio. And I hope that I can continue to grow and produce excellent, I hope, engaging conversations with some pretty profound people. So I thank everyone who's been with me so far, and I hope that you will continue the journey with me when I return in July. That said, if you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to give it a positive rating on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. It really only does take a second, and your 5-star ratings really do help. If you have a moment to spare, please consider posting a short but positive review. And consider subscribing. For those of you viewing on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you'll be informed when I upload new content. I've been trying to release new episodes every week, and besides this little break, I hope to continue doing so in the future. And I am hoping to create more video content, but this takes a lot of time and a lot of work, and any support that you can give would be greatly appreciated. For the time being, I'm only taking payments via PayPal, although I will be launching a Patreon in the very near future. So your support is greatly appreciated, and it makes my work possible. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.